Okay, so we are going to finish vessels. And when we finish vessels, that's the last of the material for your third test. Just so we have it on recording, let's, you guys tell me what's on your third test. Good. Let's start at the beginning. Cranial nerves. There's only a little bit written about it in your notes, but you're responsible for everything that was in your lab, remember? The holes it goes through, sensory or motor activity, name, number, all of that kind of stuff. So you're responsible for that about cranial nerves, yes? But you already learned that, so you should be okay. And then what after that? Spinal cord, spinal nerves, autonomic nervous system, which is nervous system 2, right? And then heart and vessels. Yeah. So we're going to start lymphatic system after that, but that's not on this test. It'll be on the next test. Cool? All right. So we just have a little bit left to do on vessels. I feel like I'm forgetting to tell you something. What am I forgetting to tell you? Your test is on Tuesday. Oh, that's it. You will have a quiz over the weekend. I will post it tomorrow for you, and it'll be due Monday night. At the time that I post that it is due, which is to be named later, but you can look on Canvas or Melanie B to figure out the time that it's due. And the idea of this quiz will be to get you to rummage through your notes and make sure that you know the kinds of questions that are going to be asked, right? So but whenever I give you guys take-home quizzes, it's really about can you use your resources and do you know what kinds of questions you might I might come up with for the test, right? So that'll be like, I'll post it tomorrow for you guys. Everybody good? Okay. And when's it due? Monday night, yes. I don't know what time yet. I'll tell you later. Okay, so what we did last time was we did arterial flow through the leg and the foot, right? Okay. And the arterial flow through the leg and the foot is all branching from which artery? No, before the femoral, what is it? External iliac goes to the leg and the foot. It also, by the way, the external iliac, even though we didn't talk about the vessels, the external iliac is also responsible for delivering blood supply to your external genitalia. The internal iliac delivers blood supply to the internal reproductive tract and the rest of the pelvic cavity. Okay, so that's the internal iliac right there, and then the external iliac is going thigh, then leg, then foot, right? But we didn't do the drainage. Yeah, right? We didn't do venous drainage. Okay, so let's do venous drainage. It's super easy. It's not really easy to see on a picture, but it's really easy to find in the cadaver. It's really easy to find on the Wireman model. So if you have trouble with 2D, just remember that you can go look at it 3D, and it's not very hard. Okay, so venous drainage is pretty easy. Here's an anterior view, here's a posterior view, right? Okay, so with venous drainage, guys, where is it all going to end up? It's all going to end up in this vein, which is where? The external iliac vein, which will then unite with the internal to form the what? Common iliac vein, right? The two commons unite to form what? Inferior vena cava. Yeah, that's how you form the inferior vena cava. Everybody good with that? Okay, so that's where we're going to end up. But let's just get there, right? Okay, first off, you're not really responsible for the foot drainage, but please note that it's exactly like you would expect it to be. You got a loop on the top, right? And some digital arteries. You got a loop on the bottom and some digital arteries. It's just like the hand, okay? And you guys have had feet for a while, so you know that there are superficial veins on the top of your feet. You can totally see them, right? Okay, so the superficial ones tend to be on the dorsal surface and the deeper ones tend to be on the other side. Okay, but after you get past those, and I don't ever ask you those, it's hard to see in an image. Okay, after you get past those, what's really going to happen is, watch. So let's do deep drainage first. You ready? Okay, deep drainage is pretty much going to be parallel to the arterial circulation, right? So here is this vessel, these two vessels right here. These are the anterior tibial veins, which would run with the anterior tibial artery, right? On the anterior surface of the tibia, because that's tricky, right? And then what they are going to do is wrap around the backside, and generally they are going to dump into the popliteal vein. Do you see that? So watch, up, around the backside, dump into the popliteal. Now, can they dump anywhere they damn well please? Yes, but they generally dump into the popliteal. So they're running up the anterior side and then dumping into the popliteal. So everybody good with that? Okay. And so that's those guys that you're seeing right there. Okay. And then you have the posterior tibial veins, which are on the posterior side of the tibia. And those go straight up the back of the leg. And then they usually unite to form one instead of two right about the back of the knee. I mean, sometimes they don't, but they usually do that. So these are the posterior tibial veins. They would be running with the posterior tibial artery along the back side of the leg. And then as they got behind the knee, they would become the popliteal vein. Good? Okay, and then it's super easy from there. Could not really be easier. As you run up through the thigh, you are called femoral, right? And then you are going to be called the external iliac as you run through the inguinal canal before you unite with the internal iliac. Does that make sense? Okay, now all we have to do then is gather up the two superficial veins that you guys have to know. The superficial drainage in the leg is way easier than it is in the arm. It's really easy to see. Even the arm isn't very hard, really. Okay, so there's only two. And this guy right back here on the back side of the leg is really, really hard for us to keep. And I think we only have one cadaver that has this vessel, but you can totally see it on the Wireman model. This little bitty superficial vessel right here is called the small saphenous vein, and it usually dumps behind the knee. Okay? Does anybody have like a superficial vein that they can see behind their knee? It's not very uncommon that you can like see a superficial one back there. It's blue and you can kind of see it. So this is the small saphenous vein, and it dumps into usually the popliteal vein. Okay, and then this honker right here that starts just anterior to the medial malleolus runs up the entire medial surface of the leg and then dumps pretty much wherever it pleases, but usually into the femoral vein. That guy right there, that's the great saphenous vein. Some textbooks call it the greater saphenous vein. I don't know why, they just like it slightly more. That's the great saphenous vein, and that is the longest vessel in the body and has ended up being really clinically important because historically speaking, it was the most common source for bypasses. Okay, so let's talk about a coronary bypass. If you guys haven't talked about this before, some of you guys know what they are, some of you don't. If I have a blockage in one of my coronary arteries, like the anterior interventricular artery, because I have arteriosclerosis and cholesterol buildup, right? The tissue downstream, the cardiac muscle, can die and you can have a heart attack, right? And you can die. So what they can do is they can bypass the blockage. How they would generally bypass the blockage is they take a chunk of another vessel from somewhere in your body. They would suture it into your aorta, yeah? Bypass the blockage and suture it in past the point of blockage, right? So does that make sense? Okay. So if you have a single bypass, they do it once, double, they do it twice. Some people have a quadruple bypass, which means they had 4 blockages in their heart, which means they should probably not eat so much pork, right? And probably exercise a little bit more. Okay, so that's a bypass. And they generally would do that, historically speaking, from the great saphenous veins because it's so long that you can take out a chunk of it and just attach it right back together. It doesn't make any difference. Or you can take the whole damn thing out if you need to because you've got so many superficial alternate routes of circulation with veins. It doesn't really matter if you take it out. But eventually somebody was bright enough to say, you know what? If you were actually bypassing an artery, it would be better if you used an artery to bypass an artery than a vein. Why? Yeah, it's got a thicker wall, right? More elasticity. We know that they're different. So after that, they got a little smarter and then they started using arteries. Depends on what sex you are, which artery they use. If you are a male, they will take out your mammary artery because you're not doing a whole hell of a lot with it, right? You're like, it's fine, I guess it's fine that it's there. If you're a female, they're less likely to take out your mammary artery. And sometimes what they do, and I just learned this last year, sometimes what they do is instead of taking a whole vessel out and sticking it to your aorta and bypassing the blockage, sometimes they just reroute like one of your intercostal or one of your thoracic arteries onto the surface of the heart. They just leave it attached to where it is and just route it onto the surface of the heart and suture it in. Isn't that kind of cool? So that's a bypass, and this is really important because of bypasses. Most of the bypasses in our cadavers that we have are veins, not arteries, because of course most of them are relatively elderly, right? Our oldest cadaver right now, our oldest donor was 95. And I think the youngest was, I don't know, 68, 70, something like that, maybe 72. Okay, so that's the great saphenous vein. That is venous drainage of the leg. Everybody good? Okay, now this part you need to pay attention to, A, because it's a little complicated, and B, because I like it. And that means that you might run into it in your future. Okay, you ready? So this is fetal circulation. Fetal circulation, first off, I need to explain to you a little bit about fetal circulation. You have an image in your notes that you can follow as we're going through here. But first I need to explain a little bit about why fetal circulation is different, a little bit about terminology. Okay, first off, let me say that I'm probably going to over-explain some things about pregnancy to those of you who are well educated about this stuff. But considering that Utah is an abstinence-only education state and Texas was as well, there is an awful lot of misunderstanding and an awful lot of ignorance about anything related to reproductive anatomy and physiology. So I'm not insulting your personal intelligence. I'm just trying to make sure that I explain it well enough that it makes sense to everyone. Okay? So first thing is fetal circulation is different than adult circulation because primarily do the fetal lungs need different blood than the rest of the body? They don't, right? Because they're not doing gas exchange with the environment. They do, of course, need blood because they need nutrients for metabolism and growth, right? But they don't need different blood. Yes? Does that make sense? In addition, of course, the fetal digestive system really isn't doing absorption of nutrients, is it? Right? So what is going to happen is that when you were a fetus, you needed an extra organ that you don't have anymore to actually do exchange, and that extra organ is called the placenta, okay? And the placenta is embedded in the wall of the mom's uterus. So I'll talk about how it actually gets there. So first, we need this extra organ during fetal circulation, and let me show you where it is, and I want to explain it to the point that you understand it, and it's totally fine if you didn't get this stuff yet, because I don't think that I actually understood this really, really well until way the hell after high school. Here's what happens during fertilization, implantation, and pregnancy in the early stages. You guys ready? Okay, so some of you guys already know this, but fertilization happens in the fallopian tubes. Okay, that's where the egg meets the sperm. But that is not where implantation should occur, yeah? Implantation should occur in the uterus, yes? Okay, so what happens is this fertilized egg, this zygote, will start to go through a little bit of cell division, and then what it should do is move down to the uterus and implant in the wall of the uterus. When it implants in the wall of the uterus, that physiologically is a pregnancy, okay? Fertilization is not pregnancy. Most fertilization events, at least half, just slough off. They never actually attach to the wall. Okay, so if it attaches to the wall, you will start developing this organ that we call the placenta. And the placenta is an interesting organ. What happens is as the implanted embryo starts to become a fetus, eventually it will start to develop a blood supply and blood flow, right? And it will start to develop this rich capillary bed. It's like disc-shaped on the wall, and it gets bigger as the baby gets bigger. But then in addition, the mom will start to develop more blood supply to her uterus than she had before, because of course she needs it, right? But ultimately, the branches that are supplying the mom's uterus came off of the internal iliac artery, right? Giving rise to a uterine artery. Everybody with me so far? Okay. So at the site of implantation, the mom is going to start to grow a really rich capillary bed, and the fetus is going to start to grow a really rich capillary bed. And these two capillary beds need to snuggle together, but they never need to be attached to one another. Who can tell me why you would never want them to attach to one another? Never attach those tubes. Why? Yes. Is the baby genetically identical to me? No, right? It's half not me. Yes? It's half not me. So what we need opportunity for exchange, but no opportunity for immune response attack, because that is a foreign invader. So what you need to snuggle them together, really, really lots of surface area, super close together, so that I can get gas and nutrient exchange, but no blood exchange. Does that make sense? Okay, so that's what we need. This structure develops on the wall, and it is this weird-looking disc-shaped structure right here called the placenta. We have one on Redwood campus in a jar because one of my students donated his wife's placenta. She let me. I know her too. After they had the baby, and I preserved it in formaldehyde so that you guys could actually see what a placenta looked like. My boss was like, "Where did that come from?" I'm like, "I don't know, it's been here forever." So it's really cool to look at it. You can actually see the structure. So it is half maternal capillaries, half fetal capillaries, and it's going to be the site of gas and nutrient exchange between the mom and the baby. Everybody with the concept? Okay, so it is not the same as an amniotic sac. Okay, so here we go. Here's the placenta. This would be stuck to the wall of the mom. This is not a cute baby because it ain't got no skin on it. But if it did, the belly button would be right about there. Yeah? And then this would be the rest of the baby. So we're going to talk about what's going to happen, and then we'll follow it through. You ready? All right, so fetal circulation is different than adult circulation because the lungs, the kidneys, the digestive tract are not doing those jobs. The mom is doing those jobs for the developing fetus. And so the fetus and the mother are going to exchange through the placenta, which is embedded in the wall of the mother's uterus. Rich capillary supply from the mom, rich capillary supply from the fetus. And so the placenta is going to be attached to the fetus by what we call the umbilical cord, right? And everybody's heard of an umbilical cord before, right? So it actually looks just like this. It's so freaking weird looking, okay? So totally look at it when you guys, like, if you're on Redwood campus for the reproductive lab next week, look at the placenta. It's not gross. Well, I mean, it's not grosser than anything else, right? It is preserved in formaldehyde, just like everything else, so it's not, there's no pathogens to worry about or anything. Okay, so here's what's going to happen. Mom delivers oxygen-rich, nutrient-rich blood to her uterus and therefore her placenta. As what kind of organ? Systemic or pulmonary organ? Systemic. She delivers systemic blood supply to her uterus, right? But a lot because she's pregnant. Okay, so, and you can, of course, see oxygen getting picked up because the color will change right here, right? So what happens is the baby's capillaries are going to be exposed to the mom's capillaries but not attached. And oxygen is going to move from the maternal capillary bed into the fetal capillary bed, and nutrients are too, right? Nutrients don't change the color. Everybody with me? Okay. And then what's going to happen is that blood is going to move from the placenta through this big vessel, the big red one, into the baby through the belly button. Does that make sense? Into the umbilicus. This big vessel is moving toward the fetal heart, so we call it an umbilical what? Artery or vein? Toward the fetal heart. Vein. Yes, it is umbilical vein. Yes, that makes sense? One big umbilical vein. Now, what does this have to do with amniotic sacs, by the way? People get placenta and amniotic sac confused because you know the baby's in a bubble, right? In a little aquatic sac. You used to be a little aquatic organism. That's not directly related, but what would you would have wrapped all the way around here would be a big bubble of fluid, right? But it's not directly related to the blood flow here. So you can't use those terms interchangeably. Amniotic sac and placenta are not the same thing. Everybody good? Okay, so the blood is going to move, nice rich blood is going to move into fetal circulation through this umbilical vein, right? And then it's going to dump behind the liver into the inferior vena cava. And when it dumps into the inferior vena cava, you're going to get a mixing of blood. Notice that this is the only really highly oxygenated vessel in the entire story. Do you see that? Okay, now that means that the fetus is going to have to work a little harder because you do not have a good high oxygen blood delivered to your organs. Does anybody know how the fetus compensates for that mixed blood? What, do you know anything about fetal heart rates? Yeah, they're really fast. Yeah, you got to deliver a lot of blood if it doesn't all have really, really rich oxygen. Okay, so follow this. You're going to dump it into the inferior vena cava. It's going to go where it always does from the inferior vena cava, which is to what chamber? Right atrium, yeah. It's going to go to the right atrium. But we don't need a disproportionate amount of blood to go to the lungs, but we do need blood to go to the lungs. So we don't need half of the blood to go to the lungs. We need some blood to go to the lungs. So what we do is instead of sending blood right atrium, right ventricle, through pulmonary trunk to the lungs, we send some of it that way, but some of it we send through a hole between the left and the right atria, When it is open, it's called the what? Foramen ovale, right? When it's open, it's called the foramen ovale. It shunts some of the blood from the right side to the left side. Does that make sense? Okay. And now some of it's in the left side, and then both of the atria contract, and you move everything into the ventricles, right? And then the ventricles contract, right? And you're going to push blood to the lungs, and you're going to push it into the aorta. But you're going to have one more opportunity for mixing. Do you see that right there? That, during fetal circulation, is still open, and it is a duct that connects the aortic arch to the pulmonary trunk. And when it's open, it's called the ductus arteriosus. It allows a little bit more exchange between the two blood flow patterns. And when it's closed, it's called the what? Do you know? It's that little thing that connects the aortic arch. You can still see it in an adult. Yeah, ligamentum arteriosum. That is the remnant of a fetal structure that's still visible pretty much in all of us. You can find it. When it closes, only the connective tissue really stays around, and it becomes pretty much a ligament, right? So for right now, it's still open. So that allows for a lot of exchange between the blood that would normally be in systemic and pulmonary circulation, right? Okay, so this is where it gets confusing. You ready? Okay, so now we pump blood into the aorta, and then the fetal heart is responsible for delivering blood to the fetal organs, but the placenta is a fetal organ, okay? So stick with me. We are going to push blood into the aorta, and it's going to deliver it to all of the systemic organs just like you'd expect it to, right? So that they can continue to grow and all of that stuff. Drop off oxygen, pick up carbon dioxide, drop off nutrients, pick up waste, yes? But at the same time, what you are going to do is, watch, when you get to the bottom of the aorta, right? You are going to deliver blood, of course, into the internal iliac arteries, right? A branch off of the internal iliac arteries is the umbilical arteries, 2 of them, yeah? And those are going to deliver blood back to the placenta. What kind of blood? Oxygenated or deoxygenated? Pretty low oxygen, right? Even though it's kind of mixed, it's still pretty low oxygen. And then what's going to happen is you are going to drop off carbon dioxide, drop off waste products, yeah? And pick up what? Pick up oxygen, pick up nutrients, right? So you drop this is where all of the exchange occurs. This basically is functioning as lungs, digestive tract, and kidneys. Yes? For the fetus, this structure right here. The mom is doing all of the work for the fetus. Does that make sense? You guys want to go through it one more time? Ready? Okay. So just picked up oxygen and nutrients from the mom, right? Hopefully she's taking good care of herself. Lots of oxygen and nutrients. And what happens is now we are going to move that blood toward fetal circulation through this big vessel. What's it called? Umbilical vein, yes. And the umbilical vein is going to dump into which vessel? Inferior vena cava. The inferior vena cava delivers blood to which chamber? Right atrium, exactly. And the right atrium allows for mixing because there's a hole. What's the hole called between the right and left atria? Foramen ovale when it's open, right? Okay, so that's the first mixing of blood. Blood moves from the atria to the ventricles. Pump the ventricles into the arteries. Then blood mixes again through this. What is that? Ductus arteriosus, yeah? Okay, and then as it goes through systemic circulation, classical systemic circulation, you're going to deliver blood to all systemic organs, but then you're also going to deliver it back to the placenta by going where? Bottom of the aorta, where do I go now? Common iliac, then internal iliac, yeah, and then umbilical arteries back to the placenta. Does that make sense? Okay, so you basically have one fewer organ than you had when you were a fetus. So what happens to all of those structures after that? So basically now what we are going to do is we are going to, baby's full term, you're going to deliver the baby, right? And of course, you deliver the baby generally, uterus, vagina out, right? And then the baby comes out. And I know some of you guys are moms, but some of you guys are definitely not moms yet. So it's coming out, right? And the baby is coming out. And what should happen immediately when the baby takes its first breath is the pressure changes should cause the foramen ovale to slam shut. And then the baby is able to make noise, right? That's why they use the slap them on the butt, see if you could get them to make noise. It's totally rude. They just barely got here and somebody's hitting them. So they don't do that anymore. So they're born, the baby makes noise, and then they pink up, right? They pink up as they get a decent separation of systemic and arterial blood, and that's a good indication that the foramen ovale closed. And then, assuming that that happened, well, what's the next thing they're going to do with the baby? It's still attached. You got to cut the umbilical cord close to the baby, clip it off, right? And then it'll just sit there, and eventually it'll dry up and fall off. Weird, people save it too. So the baby is fine, but now let's think about the mom. Okay, assuming the baby is fine, then we'll give it 1 or 2 days, and we'll do something else too. Okay, so then the mom, basically what she has is during the process of childbirth, what generally happens is the placenta pulls apart from the wall of the uterus, and those 2 capillary beds yank apart from one another, and that's bloody. So the blood that happens during childbirth is coming from yanking the placenta, we hope, from yanking the placenta off the wall of the uterus, right? Now, the only thing that is interesting about that is that during that process, you can have a little mixing of fetal and maternal blood, which can matter later. Okay, so pulls off the wall. Okay, so now what we have is an organ inside the uterus that is no longer attached to a blood supply, and you cannot leave it there because it will cause sepsis and the mom will die. Eventually, pathogens will start to inhabit it. Okay, so what has to happen, of course, after that is that she has to deliver the afterbirth, right? That's the placenta. So they can massage her uterus and have her push a little bit more, and the afterbirth comes out. And then they have to carefully examine the placenta to make sure there's no little pieces missing that are still stuck on the wall of the uterus, because if there are, she will die if you don't get them out of there, right? It's like a dead organ sitting in her uterus. So if they examine it, everything looks great, then they don't have to do anything. If things do not look great, it looks like if there's a little chunk still in there, then they will try to massage it and see if it comes out. If it doesn't, they have to do a D&C, dilation and curettage, in which they dilate, this looks already dilated, and they basically just scrape the walls of the uterus to make sure everything comes out. It's the same thing that they would have to do if a woman had a miscarriage and they weren't sure it all came out, or even in termination of a pregnancy. That's one of the ways that they can terminate a pregnancy. So they have to make sure it all comes out. Assuming that it all comes out, then we were hoping she clots, right? And then stops bleeding, right? And then the baby, what happens with the baby is the foramen ovale will slam shut. It takes a couple of days for it to really heal, but the pressure usually keeps it closed anyway, like just kind of flat closed. But the ductus arteriosus takes 1 to 2 days to close. And what happens when the ductus arteriosus closes is the systemic arterial, the blood gas, will go up to almost 100% in the baby, right? And then you will know that they have a good separation of systemic and arterial blood. And that's usually when they send the baby home, right? That's usually when that happens, right? Does that make sense to you guys? So all of that stuff happens immediately after. So all of those umbilical vessels will atrophy. If you are a woman who has had a child, these we can still find in you if we were looking for them. They atrophy into ligaments, right? And they just stay there and you can find them, and they'll open right back up if you need to have another baby and then close back down again. So everybody good with that? Okay, so this is fetal circulation. I like fetal circulation, so you should probably study fetal circulation, yeah? All right, okay, so seems like there's something I'm forgetting to tell you, but I don't know what it is. Okay, so that is where the material for your third test ends, but we are, oh, why did I do that? But we are going to start the material for your fourth test too. Okay, hold on just a second, I didn't mean to shut that down. Lymphatic system, okay. Let me open a couple figures because I shut them down on accident. What? I don't know what that is. What is it? Oh, okay. Yeah, it's probably related to how much oxygen they have in their systemic capillaries. I don't know what it stands for, though. Okay. Hold on. Okay, so yeah, we'll do elephantiasis. All right, so we are going to do lymphatic system. Lymphatic system, the problem with lymphatic system is that most of you haven't had it before. Okay, but remember, you've got time before you have to be tested on this. It's going to be on the 4th test, okay? So I have to tell you honestly that I don't think that anybody taught me a thing about the lymphatic system until I was in college. Like, I don't even think that they actually addressed it as one of the body systems when they were talking about body systems. So if you don't know a darn thing about it, you are not the only one. So what we are going to do is get some appreciation and overview for the lymphatic system. So the lymphatic system, here's just sort of your overview picture of the lymphatic system. And the lymphatic system, what it is a system of low pressure tubes that runs relatively parallel to the venous system, but the tubes are so thin-walled and small that you won't find them at all unless you're specifically like looking for them. So why haven't you found them in the cadaver? Because they're really hard to find. What you can find in the cadaver, however, are these little lumps on the lymphatic system called lymph nodes. Okay, so we are going to find a better picture than that one. That one's the one that's low resolution. I'll get the other one. There's the one that's higher resolution. Okay, so this one's higher resolution. Okay, so what you have is a system of low pressure tubes, and they're running relatively parallel to your veins, and they're running, they're responsible for doing 2 major things, and the 2 major things are these. They're responsible for draining the excess tissue fluid that leaked out of your capillaries but wasn't pulled back up by osmosis. Remember me telling you that the arterial end of a capillary bed will always have a little bit of filtration, yes? And then you pull 90% of it back up by osmosis. What about that other 10%? If every time you went through a capillary bed you leaked 10% of your fluid, A, you'd run out of blood, and B, you would look like the Michelin Man, right? You would be enormous. So how do you get the rest of it back into your cardiovascular system? Well, what you do is you pull it into your lymphatic system, and then ultimately what happens is you dump it into your subclavian veins all the way up here. So you dump it all the way back into your subclavian veins. It takes a little while to get up there. So the first major function of the lymphatic system is to regain that leaked fluid. And then the second thing is really important. As you are moving that fluid up, you're moving it past checkpoints. And these checkpoints, I know you guys have run into these before in your own body or in the body of someone you know. These checkpoints are these little nodes, do you see them, that are on the vessels? And each one of them, what I want you to imagine is every single time you're running the fluid through it, it's like running it past a guard station, because what these are is lymph nodes, and you've got them like interspersed all around your body. And they are going to assess the fluid and look for bad guys. They are going to look for pathogens. Pathogens? Do you know the term antigen? Okay, if you don't know the term antigen, let me just introduce you to the term antigen. All species have on the surface of your cells genetically determined, think of them as flags, right? That are a combination of a protein-sugar combination. And we all, assuming we have no aliens in here, have human-specific flags or antigens on our surface, right? That makes sense? Okay, but if I were an E. coli, I would not have the same antigen. And if an E. coli got into my system and somebody recognized the antigen, you could tell it was foreign. Does that make sense? So we have human-specific ones, and then we have some even more specific ones, which is the reason that some of us can give blood to each other. So does anybody know the blood type? Okay, what's yours? I'm a positive too. What's yours? O negative. O negative, okay. O negative for you? Okay, let's do you. Okay, let's just do the letters. Ready? I'm gonna give blood. We're gonna give blood to each other if we can. Okay, so the antigens on our surface, don't look at the positives and negatives for right now, because that's a different antigen system. Okay? So if you are O, and O is the most common blood type, and I am O, if you are O, it means, oh, I don't have any antigens on my surface. And he's A, and they creatively named the first human antigen on blood cells that they found A, and then the second one they named B, right? So here is how this whole immune system thing works. You can recognize the presence of foreign antigens. You can't recognize an absence of antigens, and you can't recognize any antigen that you have. So what would happen is, let's imagine that we wanted to give blood to each other. Which of us could give blood to the other? He's A, I'm O. I can give blood to him because he can't recognize the absence of antigens. He can't give blood to me because it would kill me, probably, right? Okay, so what is this doing? Not related to blood donation. So I want you to imagine that this person right here stepped on a nail, right? And they got exposed to Clostridium tetani, really common soil bacterium, right? And so what is going to happen is the Clostridium tetani would get into the tissue fluid, right? And then what would happen is these vessels would suck up that tissue fluid. But then they're not going to just dump it into circulation. They send it through guard stations, and not one, but maybe 25 on the way back to your cardiovascular system. Does that make sense? And so at each time you go through a guard station, you have the opportunity to recognize and launch a defense and immune response. Does that make sense? So it's not just like you're using the fluid and pulling it back in. You are assessing and monitoring the immune needs of the fluid at the same time. Does that make sense? Okay, so you are doing that. In addition, anything that you leaked that couldn't be pulled back up by osmosis has to be pulled back up this way, right? And one last thing, and then I'll show you lymphedema and elephantiasis. The other thing is that fats, when you eat, fats don't get absorbed directly into the cardiovascular system. They get absorbed into the lymphatic system. So if I eat proteins and sugars, those go into the intestinal capillary usually and get pulled back in via the superior mesenteric vein and get shunted through hepatic portal circulation, which we learned last time. Okay? Fats bypass hepatic portal circulation and go directly into the lymphatic system. So if you eat a super fatty meal like Thanksgiving, so at Thanksgiving, if they have those good mashed potatoes that are so simple, and like mine have creme fraiche and butter, it's like every damn thing, I would literally eat those every day if I wouldn't get fat. But I would be 700 pounds. Okay, so eat that, eat some gravy. There are 3 kinds of pie, so you know you need 3 small slices, right, of pie, right? So you eat a really, really fatty meal. Immediately after a fatty meal, if you look at your lymphatic fluid, it is opaque because there's so much fat in it. And then if you give yourself 25, 30 minutes, all of those fat globules will make it into your cardiovascular system, but not immediately. Now that matters. One of the reasons it matters is that if you take in lipid-soluble toxins or poisons, they don't go through your hepatic portal system. They bypass your hepatic portal system. Does that make sense? They bypass it until like the second round through. So that's important because lipid-soluble toxins and poisons build up in your system and are harder to clear out of your system. Does that make sense to you? And they also tend to store in your fat. Okay, so what we're saying is that we drain fluid that leaked out of our cardiovascular system into our lymphatic system. What if the lymphatic system gets blocked or broken? Well, then what happens is you're going to start building up fluid in that area. So let's talk about a mastectomy. Okay, one of the things that the lymphatic system does is it picks up everything from the tissue fluid. It picks up pathogens, it picks up cancer cells, it picks up proteins, it picks up everything. So if I had breast cancer and had a mastectomy because of breast cancer, what they generally do when they remove the breast tissue and the cancerous tissue is that they also remove all of the lymph nodes and lymphatic vessels from the area. Can you see why? Because the lymphatic system is a really common route for metastasis in cancer because it's just like arranged to pick up everything, right? So does that mean anything about your likelihood of tissue fluid sort of accumulating in the arm, right? So if I removed the breast tissue and I removed the cancerous tissue, but then I removed all of the lymphatic vessels and the lymph nodes, what tends to happen to this arm? afterward? It swells, exactly, right? You have a lot of swelling associated with it because you can't drain that excess tissue fluid. That's called lymphedema. And usually what they will do is a compression garment to help with moving in that. Eventually, assuming that the woman lives, I guess it could be a man too, assuming that the person lives, eventually you start regenerating your lymphatic tissue and the drainage won't be as much of a problem as it used to be. It might still swell more than the other arm, but less so later on. Does that make sense? Okay, now, if you have a serious, serious disease that really blocks drainage, you can get some serious buildup of fluid in the area. And this is a communicable parasite that causes elephantiasis. This is not the elephant man disease. This is a communicable parasite. Okay, so here's what happens. In certain equatorial, mostly really moist regions of the world, you have lots and lots of biting flies and lots of mosquitoes. Okay? And of course, mosquitoes are problematic for a million reasons. This is another reason. And what they can do is, if I get infected with this pathogen, what will happen is the eggs are in my bloodstream, and if it bites me and then bites you, you can transmit from one person to the other, okay, this pathogen. So what does the pathogen do? Well, the eggs are transmitted via bites, right? But then the pathogen likes to get into the lymphatic system and go through its life stages. So it goes from egg to larva, and the larva likes to insist in your lymphatic system. And as the larva starts to grow, it blocks your lymphatic system. And then what happens? You get swelling. So I'll show you some pictures of elephantiasis. Okay, so here's the first picture of elephantiasis of the leg. You can see all the swelling associated with elephantiasis of the leg. Okay, and then these get even worse. Ready? This is elephantiasis of the testes. Okay, this is elephantiasis of the penis. Not a good sign. This is communicable elephantiasis that ran through an entire village, and they all have elephantiasis of the testes. Okay, so what the heck do you do about this? What you do about that is, A, you want to reduce mosquitoes and biting flies, right? You want to make sure that you're controlling mosquito and biting fly populations. And B, if someone is actually infected, then you need to get it out of that person, otherwise it's going to spread to other people. Does that make sense to you? Unfortunately, this is an animal parasite, and you are an animal. So it's problematic to treat animal parasites because, for instance, if I give myself a medication that attacks cell walls, I don't have any cell walls. I should be cool, right? If I give myself a medication that impacts a viral life cycle, I'm not a virus. I should be fine, right? But how do you get an animal out of an animal? You have to poison it out of there. So the medications to actually get rid of this are really, really hard on your system, super hard on your system because you're an animal. Okay, so that's elephantiasis. So now I want to talk to you guys a little bit about some functionality of the lymphatic system. Okay, so note to self, the stuff I'm going to talk about right now is pretty complicated, and I do want to have a class discussion about it so that we will all be better informed humans. But the level that I will test you about it is just the level that's in your notes. Okay, so even if it gets kind of complex today, I'm not going to test you with that level of complexity, but I do want you to engage in this conversation because it's a really important public health conversation. Okay, so let's talk about let's talk about what your lymphatic system does with both defense and immunity. And first I have to define defense and immunity for you. You ready? Okay. So your lymphatic system helps you with both defense and immunity. Defense is what I do when something invades me, right? And defense is usually kind of dumb, like something weird looking gets in my body and a big old dumb macrophage, a big old brute just whoops up on it, right? But really all it's like is like, I haven't seen you before, crack, right? But it's not smart and it's not going to learn from that exposure. Immunity is learning from exposure so that you'll be better prepared next time and less likely to go down. So the metaphor is, if you're walking down a city street somebody comes around a corner and clocks you in the face, right? You just defend yourself at the time, right? But immunity is, I've walked down this street 5 times and gotten clocked twice, so the 6th time I walk down the street, I'm going to carry a damn baseball bat. I'm going to remember exactly how tall he is. I'm going to try to clock him first, right? So immunity learns from exposure. Your lymphatic system is really important in both defense and immunity. So we're going to talk about defense and immunity and what it does. And this gets really complex. They also go into this in a lot of detail in micro. So I'm just going to give you maybe your first exposure, maybe not, I don't know. So here's what your lymphatic system does. It produces and develops B cells and T cells. These are also called lymphocytes. They are a type of white blood cell that is abundant in the lymphatic system. Yes? Okay. And these are the smart part of your immune system. These are the part that learns with exposures. Everybody ready? Okay. So let me show you what's going to happen. All right. So remember antigens. What are antigens again? The identifying flags on the surfaces of cells, right? And so, for instance, a bacterium would have a different antigen than a human. Yes? Okay. So here's what's going to happen. I want you to imagine that I get exposed to measles. Yes? Okay. The measles have a different antigen than I have. Okay. And it's my first exposure to the measles. You with me? First exposure to measles. By the way, measles can kill you, especially if you were a child. Very, very dangerous for pregnant women. Okay. So let's say I got exposed to the measles, and this was my first exposure. What is going to happen is I'm going to do a combination of defense and immunity to prepare for the next exposure. So here's the deal. Don't look at the top first, but you have B lymphocytes, the special type of B cell. Here's what the B cell does. Listen to this part. Ask questions if you get confused. When a B cell meets a specific antigen, this is a measles antigen. You with me? Okay. What it will do is it will start to go through cell division, and it will make antibodies. These antibodies are proteins that can whoop up on anything with that antigen. They are specific heat-seeking missiles for that antigen. Okay? But in addition, and this is really important, they make a memory cell that remembers the exposure to that antigen, and then it goes through cell division again, right? And it makes cells that make antibodies to whoop up on it, and then it remembers for next time, right? So if you go through this process, you can see that with first exposure, you might go from one memory B cell that knows anything about measles to 5,000 memory B cells. And can you see with 5,000 at the second exposure that you're less likely to get sick at the second exposure? Because you see all those heat-seeking missiles and all the cells that can immediately recognize and respond to that. Does that make sense to you? So this is the smart part of your immune system that remembers the exposure and prepares for the next time. Remembers the exposure and prepares for the next time. It is not going to respond to anything but the measles antigen. It remembers measles. Okay? That makes sense? This is what your B cells do for you. They make antibodies and remember them. Okay, so what about the T cells? You ready for T cells? Okay, the T cells or T lymphocytes are the general for your immune system. They command everything. So we didn't talk about them right here, but look at them right there, and then we'll talk about T cells, and we'll go right back there. Here is what a T cell does. A T cell is the general of the immune system, and what the T cell does is the T cell is the first one that recognizes the measles antigen, and the rest of the immune system does not do a damn thing unless it gets a command from the T cell, right? So what has to happen is the T cell recognizes the antigen, it kills the antigen, but then it displays the antigen on the surface like a head on a steak, right? And then what it does is tells the B cell, this is who you are looking for, go do your business, right? That makes sense? So look at what it does. So this T cell right here finds, let's say that's the measles with the antigen, kills it, and then tells the rest of these cells about it and starts both defense and immunity. Does that make sense? It activates macrophages, it activates these other T cells called cytotoxic T cells, and then what it does is this. Do you see? It started this whole process. Okay, so why is HIV such a tragedy? HIV is such a tragedy and so damn difficult to get over because HIV infects and takes out the generals. It infects T cells and takes them out. So what will happen is, as more of your T cells get infected, right, what happens to your immune system? It goes down, and you start getting opportunistic infections, right? You get the bird flu when nobody else got it, right? You get some weird kind of pneumonia. You get a cancer that nobody else gets, like Kaposi's sarcoma. And as your T cell count falls, if it gets to a certain level, you will be diagnosed not with HIV, but with AIDS, which is, listen to the name of it, acquired immunodeficiency syndrome. Do you see why it's an immunodeficiency syndrome? Because you took out the generals of your immune system. Does that make sense? Okay, so with that in mind, before we go any further, I want to talk about vaccination, okay, and how vaccination is related to this story. Okay, so this is an important and timely thing to talk about because it's only within the last couple of years that people have decided that vaccination might not be something that they would choose to do. Linus Pauling was the one who came up with the first smallpox vaccine and gave it away free to the entire population because that's how important he thought vaccination was. But now we are dealing with people who are anti-vaccination, in part because they don't understand something really important about the whole vaccine story. So let's see if we can make it make sense to you, and you will put it in your bank as you are making your decisions. Okay? So what vaccination does is vaccination not only protects the individual, but it also protects the people who can't be vaccinated. Okay? So what I'm going to do is I am going to make two of you not be able to be vaccinated, and you guys are going to play a game. Ready? Okay. I am going to make you, you're 5 months old, your pre-vaccination level, and you keep your arms crossed so nobody can infect you, or so you can't get vaccinated, but if you touch her, she will get infected and she will get the measles. We're going to have the measles run through this room, okay? And then we're going to have somebody else who is, so we're going to try to protect her. She's 5 months old, she's pre-vaccination level. And we're going to have somebody else, let's see, you are kind of hard to get to. You just had a kidney transplant, you're immunocompromised, and you can't vaccinate, right? So we are going to try to see if this population can protect these two people that can't be vaccinated, and how many of us would have to be vaccinated in order for that to occur. Does that make sense to you guys? Okay, so I'm going to be the disease vector. My son goes to a hippie school, and half of those people do not want to vaccinate their children, and I have some feelings about that, FYI. Okay, so we are going to vaccinate none of us and see how long it takes to get to those two. And then we're going to vaccinate a few of us, and then we're going to vaccinate the vast majority of us. Ready? Okay, so if everybody's unvaccinated right now, so if I touch you, you touch everybody that you can reach, and those are people that got the measles, but you have to reach her too. Okay, ready? All right, so I am going to infect you first. Touch everybody that you can reach. Yes, you touch everybody that you can reach. You can reach her too. Okay, keep going. How long is it going to take to kill our baby? You just killed her. Okay, how long is it going to take? Get over here. Reach your hand out so she doesn't have to reach so far. There you go. There you go. So, all right, this is an unvaccinated population watching measles go through. Okay, now we are going to vaccinate every third person. If I tell you you're vaccinated, cross your arms, and when somebody tries to infect you, you don't get infected. Realizing, of course, I know that it's not 100%, but we're going with it and I can't figure out how to do the stats. Okay, so I am going to vaccinate you, okay? You can't get infected. I am going to, I'm going to vaccinate you, okay? I am going to vaccinate you, okay? I'm going to vaccinate you, and I'm going to vaccinate you, okay? Ready? All right. Apparently, if you're recluse, you'll probably be okay. Okay, this time, first, I'm going to try to start the infection in the same place that I did before. What does this do? Oh, no, you were vaccinated.
No, I wasn't.
Oh, okay. Oh, I'm going to try to start at the same place. Go. Okay. See how long it takes to get to her? He doesn't count? Right, you can't go that way. You go. Oh, we stopped already?
Yeah.
Okay, All right, that was far more effective than I expected it to be. So that was just stats. Now I'm going to vaccinate everyone but one person on each row. Okay? So you 3 are vaccinated. Actually, you 3 are vaccinated. You 3 are vaccinated because it'll never get that one. Okay? You 3 are vaccinated. You're vaccinated. You're vaccinated. You're vaccinated. You're vaccinated. You're vaccinated. You're vaccinated. And you're vaccinated. Still trying to protect the same 2 people. You ready? Okay. So, did I vaccinate you? Okay. Start you. Okay. Reach up. Touch her. Okay. We killed her. Okay. So what we will see, even though that one didn't work very well, did you get there already? Okay. So the stats generally would work that if you get, by the way, the CDC says that in order to get what we call herd immunity, you need 85 to 95% vaccination rate to protect the people who can't be vaccinated. So we still were not vaccinated enough to protect those people, right? If we also realize that the populations are mobile, yes, you are not exposed to the same population all the time. So you need herd immunity, not just in a schoolroom, not just in a whole schoolhouse, but in an entire community in order to protect the people who can't be vaccinated. So the argument that I would use, if anyone would listen to me, and if they got me to make the rules, is that you are vaccinating not to protect your child from the measles, but to protect your community from the measles, right? And there will always be people that cannot be vaccinated. And so this is a pro-social behavior. Vaccination is a pro-social behavior. I would argue, although I realize it's probably unpopular, that choosing not to vaccinate a person that can be vaccinated without any risk to the person is an antisocial behavior. And if you ask me, and they never will, and they'll never let me make rules, I would not allow children in the public school system who were not vaccinated and did not have a health reason not to be vaccinated, because they are putting people at risk. So if you wonder, why the hell would there be a 5-month-old baby in an elementary school? Well, what do moms do when they come pick up their kids? You can't leave the damn thing in the car. It's literally illegal. So you have to bring the baby in to pick it up, right? And then you've got children who can be exposed. Do you know that just like 3 weeks ago, I think, an unvaccinated child who was infected with the measles got on a plane in Canada and infected the entire plane. It is airborne. The entire plane, including 2 babies. Do you know that the measles is deadly, potentially, to babies? Yeah, it's potentially deadly, and it's really, really likely to cause miscarriages and birth defects in women who are pregnant as well. And we almost had eradicated the measles from the United States, but from all of North America, and now it's coming back with a vengeance. So these are public health conversations that actually need to have some statistics behind them. So
what are they based on not to vaccinate their kids?
They are under the impression that, first of all, it's unnatural. Let me tell you how vaccination works. And second, a lot of them think that there's too many vaccinations given at one time. It's really hard on the kid's immune system. And the third is that they're old information, like from when vaccines were first around, in that there's like mercury in the vaccine, and that there's some things that are potentially harmful. Well, those things were only minimally true at the beginning of vaccination, and now they're not true. And then there's also this thing that people misunderstand, because let me show you how vaccinations actually work. What vaccinations do is, I know what a measles antigen looks like, right? So I can kill off the pathogen, and I can take the antigen without anything living associated with it, and I can inject you with just the antigen, or some of the rest of them are, I take the organism and I kill it, and then I inject you with the dead organism so that you can launch this immune response. But do you sometimes feel bad after you get vaccinated? Because your immune system will make you feel bad. But do you have the measles? No. You don't have the measles, right? You don't. So there's a lot of misinformation out there, and there's a lot, also people don't really understand that you're not just trying to protect your child. You're also trying to protect the population at large. And there's a lot of false information out there about vaccines. And it's just like diseases that we almost had completely eradicated are coming back. and children are dying from them. But they're thinking, as long as it's not my child, it's fine. But it's not fine. It's not fine for children to die. So basically, you inject a killed antigen and you launch this first round of immune system response. And then your kid has all of those antibodies and all of those memory cells so that when they get exposed, they probably won't get it, right? But there are a lot of kids that can't be vaccinated, and that's an important thing to understand as well. So what I would say is, if you are deciding that, make sure that you are looking at reputable sources. Look for the CDC, right? The Centers for Disease Control. Look for the National Institutes of Health. There are also people that think it's a big money-making conspiracy with the pharmaceutical industry. They make no money out of vaccines. They are not a money-making enterprise. They are really some of the cheapest of the medications that you can get. My pediatrician's office, by the way, he made a stand. My pediatrician will not accept parents who don't vaccinate their children without a medical reason. He's like, I don't really care. I don't need more patients. I got more than I can handle. You are not coming into my waiting room. You are not welcome. Because it's just a big disease vector. And of course, the kids don't get any place in it. So you guys can argue with your family about it. You can go online, whatever, but use some statistics when you're doing it. Okay, so that's vaccination, which is kind of an interesting conversation to have. It's an interesting conversation to have at my son's school because, like I said, he goes to a hippie school. There's a lot of opinions by people who are crystal and Reiki healers that they think they can fix it all. Go ahead.
The flu shot this year.
Oh, flu shot.
Like the wrong, they guessed the wrong.
So let me tell you how the flu shot works and why it's never going to be as effective as other things. It is a seasonal virus, right? And it tends to spread seasonally. Here's what happens with the flu shot. By the way, none of these things are 100%. No one is guaranteeing that you won't get the chicken pox. You're just reducing your statistical likelihood. So this one's kind of interesting. How do we try to predict what is going to happen with the flu or any virus? Well, we look at the antigen, but remember, we are in an arms race against this pathogen. If they change their antigen so that you can't recognize it, then they get to propagate their population. So here's what we do with the flu shot every damn year. Every year. We look at the southern hemisphere, which gets their winter before our winter. You with me? Okay. And we watch the flu there, and we see how communicable it is, how deadly it is, and what the antigens and the pathogens look like. And then what we do is we take that antigen and we try to make a vaccine for recognizing that antigen. But what is the flu doing as it's moving from the southern to the northern hemisphere? It's mutating, exactly. So we guess as best we can what it's going to look like after 10,000 rounds of cell division and mutation. And sometimes we get a really good guess and sometimes we don't. Like, we are literally trying to battle against its system, against us, right? And it's really good, right? Like, the viruses are older than humans and their ability to mutate quickly is really, really good. So there were actually 2 different strains of the flu, and I got the flu shot this year. It was supposed to be super duper bad, and the flu shot protected against one strain better than the other. But I actually got a really minor version. I did get the flu, but I got a really minor version of the flu. And the other 3 members of my family who didn't get vaccinated were like laid out with the flu. I mean, I felt like crap, but they were like, everything was coming out of all their holes, right? I was like, I really just have a headache, and I'm pretty sure I need a nap. Did somebody have a question? So yeah, there's no guarantee. We're just looking at statistics and averages and trying to make our best predictions. Okay.
Well, because it was like off of what like we wanted the results to be. Like, I work in nursing homes and hospitals, and everyone was on isolation.
Oh yeah.
It was really bad this year.
Yeah, it was
Like,
really bad
they
this
guessed
year.
the wrong one, but
They
if
guessed
had
the wrong
right
one.
one, then it would have been a fabulous shot every.
Right, exactly. Did they vaccinate most of their patients with the flu shot? Yeah. All you can hope is that maybe they got the flu less dramatically than they otherwise would have in that situation. There were also, interestingly, 2 waves of the flu. The other one's still supposed to be coming, right? It's in the middle of it right now. And the flu shot protected against that second wave. I think it was the B strain, or was it the A strain?
No, it's the A strain now.
The A strain now. So the B strain came first, the A strain is coming now, and it's better protection against the A strain than it was. It's still, it's still stats and averages, and I know everybody wants guarantees, but that literally is not how any of this works, right? You're just trying, like, to do your best to protect yourself.
We
And of
had one
course,
with both A and B.
what?
We had one with both A and B.
Yeah, we did. It just worked better for one than the other. Okay, so this isn't, you guys are going into healthcare professions, so let's just spend 1 minute talking about the fact that now we have medical care professionals who are trying to choose not to be vaccinated against the flu and communicable diseases and those kinds of things. And some of them are saying basically this is my First Amendment right to do so. And they want to still work in healthcare. And if you work with like susceptible populations like the elderly or like children, I really hope that they do not let you work that job if you are not willing to vaccinate. Because there's like a million other things you could be doing, right? But you're a disease vector for those people. So anyway, people will do what they will do. All right, so let's talk about the anatomy overview just briefly. Since you haven't met most of these organs before, let's do the lymphatic system anatomy overview. Okay, so things that are involved in the lymphatic system. You ready? These are lymph vessels. We'll talk about those first. Okay. Along the lymph vessels are these guard houses right here called lymph nodes. Yeah. Okay. Lymph nodes vary from pinpoint size to kidney bean size. Doesn't really matter what size they are. And they're all in series. Okay. Now there are other parts to the lymphatic system. Your tonsils are a whole bunch of B cells and T cells that are at the back of the entrance to your respiratory tract and digestive tract. Isn't that a great place to have some lymphatic tissue? Right back there, right? So you can get, hopefully, launch an immune system response to respiratory pathogens or digestive pathogens with tonsils. So we'll talk about their structure and function in more detail later. Okay, and then you've got a couple of other things. We've got the spleen. So I kind of introduced you guys to a little bit of the splenic function when we did hepatic portal, but now I can tell you more about it and like wrap in some things and put them together. So do you remember what I said when I said that the spleen sent in the troops, right? So what it does is it actually sends in antibodies, B cells, T cells, and macrophages, but it sends it in through the bloodstream. So here's what a lymph node does. A lymph node is constantly examining the lymphatic fluid, right? And deciding whether you need to make B cells, T cells, macrophages, antibodies, right? The spleen is doing the same thing to the blood, right? So there's a tremendous amount of redundancy to your immune system. That's why you're still alive. So what this does, guys, is if something gets into the bloodstream, then it will launch an immune system response against it. And then, where does the splenic blood go? Hepatic portal system through the liver so that you can whoop up on it. Does that make sense? So these do it. These are your guard houses, tons of them for lymph. This is your huge guard house for blood. Okay? All right. And then two more structures. The other structures are, this one's a little hard for people to understand, but does it make sense to you that it would be a really, really good place to put B cells and T cells under all of your mucous membranes? You remember what mucous membranes are? They're the moist membranes that are exposed to the outside of the body, right? So like under your small intestine, right? That's a mucous membrane. Wouldn't that be a really great place to put B cells and T cells, just under that? So you call the B cells and T cells that are just under your mucous membranes, you call it MALT, mucosa-associated lymphatic tissue. Yeah? Mucosa-associated lymphatic tissue. And you've got it under all of those places. So do you see all this redundancy? I'm going to check my lymph. I'm going to check my blood. I'm going to use my tonsils, right? I've got all of these places that I'm looking for pathogens. And then the only other one that you're going to know, other than bone marrow, which is where your, of course, lymphocytes are made, is the thymus, which is an endocrine organ that sits on top of the heart. And really, its only important function is that that's where the generals are trained. That's where your T cells actually mature. Okay, so with our last few minutes, let's just introduce you to your lymphatic vessels. All right, so lymphatic vessels are all of these guys that you're seeing right here. And they are super duper low pressure because they are not at all attached to a pump. And so we're going to need a lot of valves in them. Okay, so how they are going to start is at a capillary bed. So let me show you your lymphatic capillary beds, and then we will do vessels, and then I'll let you guys go. Okay, 24, 2. Okay, so you have a blood capillary bed, arterial end and venous end, yeah? Woven into that capillary bed, you have lymphatic capillaries. But the lymphatic capillaries are not a circle. The capillaries are blind end. So whereas, guys, your arterial capillaries link to the venous end, yeah? And so it's like a circle. The lymphatic capillaries are blind end. They're blind end and they have one-way valves, and these one-way valves suck up everything. They suck up fluid like they're supposed to, right? But they also suck up pathogens, right? They suck up cancer cells. That's how cancer metastasizes, because these lymphatic capillaries are just sort of designed so that they pick up anything and dump it into the lymphatic system. So these guys are lymphatic capillaries, and they're microscopic, just like blood capillaries are. But when they unite and get bigger, they actually form these lymphatic vessels. And the lymphatic vessels start moving up toward the cardiovascular system. And the lymphatic vessels have to have tons of valves in them because they are even lower pressure than veins. So they're really thin-walled, they're really tiny, and they collapse immediately, so you hardly ever see them, and they have valves in them. They don't have a pump associated with them, so how do you think you get fluid to flow through those? Yes, exactly. It's the skeletal muscle pump, and it's the respiratory pump that keeps things moving in them. And then they have they have so many one-way valves that if you find a lymphatic vessel and you run your fingers along it, it feels like a string of beads. It's like all the way up. So they're super low pressure, and the blood is moving back to the heart through these lymphatic vessels. They've got tons and tons of valves in them. So that means, guys, that, what do you think? Do you think you have a better, more active immune system if you are active or if you are inactive? Yeah, you know, everything works better when you're active. Now you can see that your immune system is actually going to work better when you're active because you'll get more lymphatic flow. Does that make sense? Okay, so we will stop there for today, and then after your test, we'll pick up lymphatic system. See ya.